Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. I'm speaking to you from a town called Boulder in Colorado, where I have to tell you the weather is absolutely beautiful. Now, I know you're hating me already. I'll tell you later on in the show what I'm doing here. It's going to be quite fun. Meanwhile, the war of words between Russia and the UK government does not diminish in any way at all. In fact, Russia's foreign minister has now suggested that the Salisbury nerve agent attack could have been carried out to distract attention away from Brexit. Yeah, Sergei Lavrov says British forces may have been involved in the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Moscow rejects claims of Russian involvement, and Mr. Lavrov says other theories must be listened to. Here he was.
Some experts state it could have been very beneficial to the American intelligence services. It could have been beneficial for the British government, who ended up in a very difficult situation because it failed to deliver the terms it had promised to the British electorate for the Brexit vote. There's a whole number of reasons, and one shouldn't brush them away.
So there we are. That's what Mr. Lavrov says. He says the British government is in trouble over Brexit. It suits them. It suits the American authorities for everyone to think that Russia are the baddies. And I'm asking you, how do you respond to this news that Russia believes it could be Britain behind the poisoning? And to get involved, if you think this is complete and utter nonsense, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Call me on 0345 6060 973. Or perhaps you're yet to be convinced that it was the Russians. Maybe there's something in what he says, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe you think, actually, we ought to be working a bit more closely with Russia to get to the bottom of this, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and watch us on Facebook from here in lovely, beautifully sunny Colorado, and comment there too. Well, not just that, but the Russian embassy have now published a list of 14 questions to the British government that they want answered, including why has Russia been denied consular access to 2 Russian nationals, which is normally the situation, and a whole list of questions about why the French government have got involved in this investigation, and a lot of technical questions about sort of how could it be that the British had the antidote there on the scene. So they are suggesting, the Russians are suggesting, this was an inside job by the Brits. What do I think of that? Well, I mean, there are people out there I know who will tell you that the Twin Towers in New York was organised by the American government. There are people out there that will tell you that the death of Lady Diana in that tunnel in Paris was organised by MI5. And I have to say, the idea that the British government would do this to set up the Russians as a distraction would not only be the biggest risk any British government could take, because if it was found out, they'd be brought down virtually immediately, but it seems to me to be in the realms of absolute fantasy. I have wondered from the start, I really have, whether the Kremlin were directly involved in this, particularly given that the World Cup football is coming up in a few weeks' time, which is a big showcase for Putin's Russia. I feel certain it was a Russian actor of some kind. Whether that's involved with gangland violence, whether it's a former agent getting his own back on someone in the shape of Skripal that is seen to be a traitor in Russia, I don't know. But you tell me, is it possible that the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, is right and that Britain could be behind the poisoning? I'm going to ask Raymond in Wimborne, Dorset, that very question. Good evening, Raymond.
Good evening, Nigel.
So what do you think? Are these the wilder shores of conspiracy theory or not?
I think Mr. Lavrov is simply opening the discussion and asking a provocative question, because what I'd like to ask you, Nigel, even if it's not your personally held view, can you please explain to me succinctly why there is a compelling case why the Russian state was involved? Because there seems to be a narrative, and there seems to be a habit of shouting, "Oh, come on," at anyone who expresses a dissenting opinion. I haven't heard anyone, including the Foreign Secretary, actually able to bullet a compelling case why it was Russian state involvement.
I have to say, Raymond, I haven't seen a single piece of evidence myself. We keep on being told that it was the Russian Kremlin that was behind it. That is something that has met with international approval, even here in America. Trump expelled 60 Russian diplomats, and half the European Union states did, half didn't. And no, you're right. Anyone that dares question it seems to get rather shouted down. I'll tell you one thing that Lavrov is right about. Prior to this, Mrs. May's world standing, I think, was pretty low. And suddenly she appears like the strong, modern-day Boadicea. This is, a British leader, the strongest we've had since Margaret Thatcher. So one thing for certain, her pointing the finger at the Russian government, appearing to be very tough about it, has improved her global standing. That's the one bit, perhaps, of the so-called conspiracy theory from Lavrov that does ring true. But no, I'm with you, Raymond. I've not seen a single piece of evidence. And if Boris Johnson has evidence, absolute clear-cut evidence, why can't we see it?
Well, I agree. I'm in the unusual position of agreeing with you, Nigel.
Okay.
I feel there's... The content of the debate worries me less than the tenor of the debate. I believe in a democracy you shouldn't be shouted down. I believe that you shouldn't be asked a question such as, can you explain to me why the Russians didn't do it? Framing the question like that is just turning around normal legal theory and practice. It's, the burden of proof is on the accuser. I found the debate really destructive, really worrying, and not indicative of anything healthy for our democracy.
But there are many, Raymond, in the West who, of course, want Putin to be the bogeyman, that want Russia to be the enemy. It kind of suits them in that sense, doesn't it?
It does, and I've listened to various Russian emigres talking on the subject. The tone of their comments has been very much one of, nothing's going to change until they get regime change. Now, I think it's very worrying and very dangerous for us to be indulging people who are really preaching the doctrine of regime change. We're not destabilizing countries like Libya, countries like Iraq, ones that can be easily bullied. It's a nuclear superpower. It's a country that rightfully doesn't take kindly to being given 24-hour deadlines and such, and so on and so forth. So I've been quite baffled and disappointed by the quality of the democratic discussion about that subject. And one of my friends who works in the media, he actually was saying, why has Mr. Corbyn asked for a more reasonable and phlegmatic approach to this? And he was saying, imagine how it's going to play with Middle England. Now, I think that's indicative of the state of our democracy. Nobody's actually asking
Raymond,
the right thing to do.
Raymond, the one thing I've seen, Raymond, through the last few weeks of this is the sheer number of people who've got in touch with me here at LBC who just don't any longer believe what the British government is telling them, and they want evidence, as do you. Raymond, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Annette says on Facebook, I don't think for 1 minute it was the Russian government that did it. Evening, Nigel, there's no evidence of who did the deed. I don't think Russia did it. But isn't it interesting how ministers started saying the same thing without any evidence? I think there's a conspiracy, says John from Wales. Well, John from Wales thinks that maybe Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has a point. Matt on Facebook says, if you're open-minded enough, many things are possible. Sonia says, how many times have Russia entered UK airspace? Suspicious. Well, Sonia, you're right. In some ways, we're kind of back to the Cold War, aren't we, with Russian planes entering airspace, the Russian Navy sailing down the English Channel. Relations are at a modern all-time low. Lavrov has no credibility. His attention to Syria is a complete joke, and his current words are absurd. He should be ashamed of himself and the Kremlin, I get by text. What do we expect Russia to do from our actions? Put their hands up and say, it's a fair cop, Gov. Well, lots of views, but one thing is for certain, that when the government tell us it absolutely was the Kremlin, there are many of you that are suspicious. But that is not the same. That is not the same as the suggestion that was made today by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, that it could have been the Brits what done it. I simply don't believe that. I wonder what Kumar, who's calling from Ilford, thinks of that. Good evening.
Hi, good evening, Nigel.
So what do you think, Kumar?
I personally don't believe the Russians done it. I just think with the Football World Cup coming over there in a few months, I know they've had a few sanctions against them and everything. I do believe
Yeah.
their foreign politics at the moment are probably at an all-time low. They've got a lot of tiff-taffs going on with places. I just don't believe they will do it. If they were to do it, I personally think they might have used other means. When I mean other means, I mean maybe shooting him or even stabbing him. I don't believe they would have used such a thing that would have pointed all fingers at the Russians. I just personally believe they would have been absolutely stupid to have done what they did, the way they did it, and at such a time. I could be wrong. I'm not sure who else would have done it, but I just really do.
Well, could it be,
them
Kumar?
would have been stupid.
Kumar, could it? I mean, is it possible, Kumar? Is it possible that the British government or the British intelligence agencies are behind this, as Sergei Lavrov suggests?
Oh God, I really don't know. Again, I really don't know, Nigel. I'm not too much into the rest of the politics. I'm not sure if they would. It could be, could not be. Personally, me, I'd say split between the middle, 50-50. But I just think for the
50-50.
Russians to have done it would be absolutely stupid. They've got the Football World Cup coming up, which is the biggest tournament
I get
I
that.
believe they've ever hosted. If they wanted to get rid of him, for them, if they wanted to kill him, they wanted to kill him. If they had shot him, stabbed him, used other means, for them, a death would have been...
And Kumar, they could have been rather more efficient, couldn't they? Because actually, these two people aren't dead. And indeed, we hear that the daughter, Yulia, is now actually talking. Kumar, I thank you very much indeed for your call. On Twitter, Ali says, Britain being behind the poisoning is absolute fantasy, and it's an attempt to distract us from the truth. The actions of our allies shows the strength in our conviction that the Kremlin must be held to account. Well, there's a view there supporting the government. What I've seen through all of this is a strong distrust of what the government now tells us. And that says a lot about what's happened to our democracy. I still believe it was a Russian actor. I'm not sure it was directly done by the Kremlin themselves. I still believe the idea that the British government could have been behind this is too ridiculous for words. But I know that the main thing you're discussing today is, of course, the weather. Because you've got snow in the north of England and Scotland and flooding and 3 inches of rain forecast for Devon and Cornwall. And, I mean, generally, I have to say, I think weather forecasters have a lower reputation even than politicians. But a few weeks ago, John Ketley predicted that on Easter Monday it would snow. In a moment, we'll hear from him. But for now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on this Bank Holiday Monday. It's 7:15.
This is LBC.
It's in my hair, my eyebrows, it's even up my nose. They make painting look easy on the telly, but let me tell you, it's not. The wall looks like it's been finger painted by a giant child. Who's going to rescue this? Oh, relax, relax. It's Trust a Trader. Actual professionals who know what they're doing and don't leave the place looking like, well, my face. Now I can concentrate on the important stuff. Whispering peach or dirty mayonnaise. Visit trustatrader.com.
Life has a nasty habit of, well, dropping you in it, and this can mean sometimes you need some extra cash fast. That's where Fornovo.com comes in. Our short-term loan service is geared to get you out of a hole as quickly as possible, and we think you'll be amazed at how much you could save compared to our competitors. Just text HAPPY to 66777 now. Representative APR 448%. Warning, late repayment can cause you serious money problems. For help, go to moneyadviceservice.org.uk. Fornovo.com. Your loan, your call.
Hello, I'm your smoke alarm. I'm just hanging out up here on the ceiling. Could you possibly get up here and test me by pressing my button? I meant kind of like now. You seem to spend a lot of time pressing buttons on your phone. But can your phone wake you and your family up in the night to save your lives? Because I can, if I'm working. So remembering to test me is crucial. How about we take it from the top? Hello, I'm your smoke alarm. Please test me now.
Smoke alarms. They need to work to keep you safe. Press to test. Monthly is best.
At the third stroke, the time sponsored by Cunard will be any time you like. Time to stop. Time to relax. Time to indulge. Time to love. Showtime! Time for a voyage with Cunard.
The Nigel Farage Show on LBC.
Now, I know that politicians are extremely unpopular, estate agents are extremely unpopular, but another group of people who I think I must have cursed weathermen more than anybody else in my life. That's because my great hobby of going out to sea, fishing, I've always studied the shipping forecast, and often it's been wrong. But sometimes, just sometimes, weathermen get things right. And a few weeks ago, in fact, it was on the 18th of March, when we had the second big wave of snow that had come in March, I interviewed John Ketley, and I said to him, I presume this is the end of the bad weather. Let's have a listen to what he said. 2 snowfalls in March. Can you tell us that once the mini beast is over, there'll be no more snow?
No, I'm not going to tell you that, Nigel, because, I think it's only fair now. I'm speaking to you, I'm speaking to a legend, and you could be the first person to hear from me that this is not the end of the snow this month. It is a truism, and I have told a few people that over many years, that it is more likely to snow on Easter Day than it is on Christmas Day. And at the moment, the suggestion would be that the cold weather comes back for Easter.
Whoa! Well, praise where praise is due, and joining me now is John Ketley. Good evening, John.
Good evening to you, Nigel. It's very nice to hear that again, I have to say. Nice to get that one right.
Well, I didn't hear it anywhere else. It was kind of a John Ketley exclusive on LBC, and you've been proved to be right. So how extensive is the snowfall today?
Well, it is pretty nasty still, I have to say, Nigel. Yeah, there was some very heavy snow this morning. First thing over Wales and the Peak District, Derbyshire, running across the M62 in Yorkshire as well. There was quite a few accidents up there. That snow band is now moving that bit further north. It's well across Scotland. And so you wouldn't hear this every time from me, but there's snow in the Trossachs tonight, and there is still some snow around the Dumfries and Galloway area and the borders of Scotland. So there's some heavy snow still to come across the far north tonight.
Well, I want to give you massive congratulations for getting this awful forecast right. So I'm going to ask you now, I'm going to get you now to play double acquits with your forecasting ability on this show. Are we in for a barbecue summer, John Ketley?
Well, let's just say this. Put it this way. If you get a cold March, and we did have a very cold March, it has to be said. Everybody had a very cold March. Some people are saying it was the coldest for 30 years. I'm not going back that far. I think it was just the coldest since 2013, especially across the south of the country. So the coldest since 2013 by a way. And I would say that if you get a cold March, you normally get some hot summer weather. And I would say at this stage that the middle of summer would be the hottest part of the year. In other words, late June into July, round about Wimbledon time, would be, on statistics, the hottest part of the year. Now, one day to avoid for a barbecue, and if you look at the 3 months of statistics for the summer months, which we take as June, July and August, obviously, there's only one day in those 3 months where the temperature has never reached 30 degrees Celsius, and that is a record going back 160 years. So, Nigel, if you're thinking about having a barbecue on one day in the middle of summer, avoid the 13th of June. That is the one day where it's never reached 30 degrees C. I hope you're recording this one as well.
Oh, we're recording it. In fact, I've just decided I'm going to book the first week of July off on holiday and go to Cornwall on the back of what you've just said. And, John, we will hold you to it. But listen, many congratulations for that forecast you gave us back on the 18th of March. And we'll come back to you very soon. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Nigel.
Well, that was great. And didn't he do well? He really did. Back to Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, saying it could well have been in Britain's interest for the poisoning incident in Salisbury to have happened. Theresa May in a weak position over Brexit is what he suggested. Nick in Wallington says, only the naive lefty conspiracy theorists would believe the Russians. What an insult to the British people by the Kremlin to believe they can brainwash us like they have the Russian population with their childish explanations. Well, I have to say, I'm kind of with you, Mick. I do not believe it possible that the British government could have been involved in this. I simply don't. But maybe someone out there does, and if you do, call me on 0345 6060 973. Let's see what Ricky, who's calling from Dagenham, thinks. Good evening, Ricky.
Hi, Nigel. You all right?
I'm all right. Yeah.
I'm very sceptical. I don't believe the British government done it, but I'm very any government, like the Russian government, or anyone, would have to be so silly to do this when all the fingers are going to point directly straight back at them. Like, who would do that? And especially with the Russian elections going on and the World Cup going on, absurd that they would do something so obvious at such a time. I believe, anyway. But I don't think the British government are as stupid to do that either. But I don't know. Something's not right. Something's definitely not right. I can't see why. Would that nerve agent only come from Russia? So why would they do that in such a time when the whole world is focusing in on them?
Well, isn't it possible, Ricky? Isn't it possible that if you were a former Russian agent, you might have had access to this stuff, you might have been able to bring it into the country using a diplomatic bag, something we discussed the other week, and you know, an entirely feasible proposition, and you may look at this bloke Skripal, and you may well see him as a traitor, somebody who gave Russian state secrets to the West, and you may well have done it as an act of revenge. Isn't that to me seems more likely than it being sanctioned by Putin, personally.
But why
that's how I see it, Ricky.
But why wouldn't they wait until after the World Cup or after the elections are done? They only had to wait a few more months. Why do it now? They had all
why
the
take the
before
risk?
to do.
Yeah.
Why did they? Why do it a week before the elections or a few weeks before the World Cup? They only had to wait till September when it's all died down, and they could have done it then. The bloke's been living in England for how many years? Why have they done it there? It's so the whole world is focusing in on Russia. I don't agree with what Putin does, and I'm not a supporter of these by any means, but something's not right. It's like, and it's the same with all the Donald Trump situation and everyone trying to blacklist him. It's the same kind of thing. All the bad media, something's not right somewhere. And I'm not saying it's the British government boys them.
No.
Yeah, something's not right somewhere. It's fishy. And I don't believe a word our government's saying anyway. It's just full of lies. You're the only
Ricky, this is what I keep hearing, Ricky. I mean, I just get the feeling there are millions of people out there who are now deeply, deeply sceptical about government. Ricky, thank you very much indeed for your call. Gloria says on Facebook, why would our government want to do this and harm his daughter as well? Doesn't make sense. Well, Gloria, if you believed in the conspiracy theory, it would be to divert attention away from Brexit, because millions of Brexit voters don't think the government's doing a very good job, and to improve the standing of Theresa May on the world stage, which has certainly happened. I'm putting that as an argument. I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm not saying that I agree with it. Graham says, well, one would hope not, in the case of Britain doing it herself, but no evidence has been released yet implicating Russia. And that, Graham, is the bit of this story that I think many of us find difficult. Someone who has been upset and hurt by this is Mark, who lives in Salisbury, who says this nerve agent attack occurred yards from my front door a couple of days before I was due to move house, and the ensuing disruption and delays have cost me dearly. I don't care who did this. No, Mark, I'm sorry, you have suffered as a result of this. Philip is calling from Bridgewater. Hello, Philip.
Hello there, Nigel. I'd like to say I've been supporting you for many years, and I wish you had not given up the leadership of UKIP. But never mind, that's another story.
Well, there we are, Philip. There we are. That's life. But you know, Brexit. I do think, Philip, that we're leaving the European Union on the 29th of March next year, which is the main thing I'd campaigned for all those years. However, I'm concerned about the terms. But let's get to Russia, and let's get to this accusation. Could the British government stoop to such levels, in your view?
Yes, most definitely. I mean, when you see what's happened to you over the years, and I've been watching it all very closely, being a UKIPper, and I absolutely believe it possibly could be, because I believe if Putin was behind this, he would have made sure they were gone within a day. They wouldn't have lasted. I just don't believe it was a professional hit at all. I do believe it was a put-up job. It could be from Russia, but I don't believe it's the Putin is behind this at all. Because
you think, Philip, that I mean, Putin is a better class of assassin in your view?
Oh,
yeah?
Most definitely. If he intended to kill those people, they'd be dead. They would have been gone within a day. And I mean, you got to look at the way it's.
But Philip, wouldn't the same argument apply? Wouldn't the same argument apply to the British government if they'd done it?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I'm just looking at the way it's panned out. How many days it took them? 2-3 weeks to find out it was on the door handle of the house? I mean, working in nuclear and in that way, you know, with contamination and things like that, I can tell you now that if it was a genuine case, they would have shut that down within a day or two. They would have shut it right down. It was very, very unprofessional how the government went around sorting it out. Because if you got contamination like they had, I mean, it should have all been spotted within a day or two. I mean, the risk they took by letting other people touch that door. I know it could have been a postman, it's anyone else could have touched those parts.
So you're pretty unimpressed, Philip. You're pretty unimpressed with the way the British government's handled this, yeah?
I think it's absolutely diabolical. I just cannot see how Putin would be behind something so amateurish.
Interesting.
And it is very amateurish.
No. Philip, you've made the point and made it extremely well. Thank you. Phil is calling from New York. Good.
Great to have you back on the right side of the pond. I just wanted to call you and say that it's completely preposterous to think that somebody in Theresa May's cabinet or somewhere in the MI5, MI6 sort of world would sit down and think, all right, we're going to unleash a banned chemical agent in a civilian village where we're going to fail to kill the guy that is going to suffer from it. And the fact that we're even talking about Sergei Lavrov's obvious distraction from the rest of the story is taking away from a rare moment of competence from the Theresa May government.
Well, certainly, Phil, her standing in the world is much, much higher. But let me ask you something. Why can she or Boris Johnson...
being competent.
No, well, that's certainly true. Or strong, or decisive, or any of those things. But Phil, if they're so certain, and Boris again and again has said absolutely it is the Kremlin that's done this, why can't they, Phil, just provide us with one piece of evidence so that we can all make up our minds and say they're right?
I'm sure there's all sorts of secret reasons why they can't be handing around the case files for that sort of thing to the public.
Okay.
I mean, that's definitely not a deal breaker for me. And I'll tell you what, the fact that the Russians would do this, again, banned chemical... You're not even allowed to use this stuff against soldiers in a war zone. That's how bad it was. They used it in a civilian village in the UK. That's bad.
So who did it, Phil? Who did it, in your view?
It must have been either the Russian intelligence services or somebody connected with them. Your theory that it might have been somebody going rogue, plausible.
Yes.
But, again, how did he get his hands on this stuff in the first place?
Well, answers that we don't know. Phil, I thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive at LBC, live from Colorado. It's now 7:30 and time for the news with Thomas Watts.
The South African anti-apartheid campaigner Winnie Mandela has died at the age of 81. She was married to the country's first black president, Nelson Mandela, for almost 40 years, most of which he spent in prison. Russia's foreign minister says it's outrageous the UK hasn't allowed Russian consular staff access to the daughter of the former spy poisoned in Salisbury. Sergei Lavrov suggested the US or British security services may have been involved in the nerve agent attack. The police watchdog's investigating after a man died following his arrest. The 26-year-old is believed to have swallowed a substance after he was held on Good Friday in South London on suspicion of carrying a knife. LBC weather, rain and hill snow moving north through this evening, becoming milder across southern England and Wales, a low of 2 degrees.
LBC travel on the M25. There's a lane closed in both directions between junction 24 for Potters Bar and 25 at Enfield for the ongoing barrier repairs. Into town on the A13, that's still struggling at the Wennington interchange. A lane has been closed there for the emergency repairs after a manhole has collapsed. And on the North Circular, it's still fairly heavy westbound at the Cricket Billet interchange after a car was on fire. The M4, that's busy into town approaching junction 2 at Brentford, and also seeing queues on the M40 towards town at junction 4 for the Handy Cross roundabout. LBC Travel, I'm Claire Sharp.
This is LBC.
Divorce can be expensive. It affects your finances, assets, home, savings, pension, and most of all, your relationship with your children. It's probably one of the toughest times you'll ever go through. Cordell & Cordell understands these issues and helps men maximise their roles in their children's lives. Call now on 0330 60 60 161 or visit cordellcordell.co.uk. Office in central London. A partner men can count on.
Vision Consulting Chartered Accountants have seen astonishing growth over the years. So now, their ever-expanding client base means they're looking for remarkable people to join the Vision Consulting team in all areas of the business. In particular, they have immediate start vacancies for senior tax directors and payroll clerks. But they'd love to hear from anyone with a proven track record in accountancy. For a bright new future, visit visionconsulting.co.uk and apply today.
Namaste. Welcome to Mala, London's unique Indian dining experience. Located at the historic St Catherine's Docks, the hidden jewel of London. Marvel at the authentic antiques, murals and paintings from India's rich history. Then enjoy the finest Indian cuisine, traditionally prepared with recipes that have been handed down through the centuries. For a truly authentic taste of India, visit malarestaurant.com. Block management. 2 very simple words. But what do they actually mean? Well, there's budget approval for starters, then service charge invoices, health and safety paperwork, cleaning, gardening, maintenance, inspections, contracts, insurance, emergency call-outs, and a whole lot more besides.
So for complete block management solutions, just remember 3 simple letters. ABC. ABC Estates will take care of all your day-to-day management, leaving you as happy as Larry. See abcestates.co.uk or call 0800 888 6688.
This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
When the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says it could be the Brits that did it, it could have been us that put the poison there because it distracts attention away from Brexit, I have to say I find it very hard to believe, but a lot of you really still very suspicious about the government pointing the finger as firmly as they are at the Kremlin. Now, bit of Brexit news. Reports in The Sun and The Express today that Theresa May's allies fear that cabinet ministers may force her to take a much weaker stance on immigration control in the Brexit negotiations. It's believed that Mrs May is outnumbered by 8-3 on the cabinet's Brexit negotiations committee, and that we will not, even when we've left the European Union, take proper control of our borders. Why? Because she's desperate to get a trade deal. Now, the chairman of Migration Watch, Lord Andrew Green, has said failure to secure full control over EU immigration would be a slap in the face to many millions who voted for Brexit. And boy, isn't he right about that. We're told that the plan from the government is to give a presumption to grant rather than refuse settled status in the UK. And some officials expect immigration numbers to go up as a result of this and not down. And I would just suggest, Prime Minister and others, that you remember that the decisive factor, the reason that Brexit won, is that people in our country, by a majority, quite naturally, as with most other countries in the world, want to control the borders and decide who and how many people can come in. It's a debate that's kicking off here in America today in a very, very big way, as a caravan of people are now making their way through Mexico with the intention of getting to this country. More of that in a bit. But back to, is it even possible, or is it just a crackpot theory, that the government could have been responsible for this? Now, Dwayne on Facebook says, it will all make sense when we are told that Brexit cannot happen because Russia is too much of a threat. Dwayne, I have to say that in Brussels, Mr. Juncker, the big boss, and his deputy, Franz Timmermans, both said within the last 2 weeks that Russia now poses such a threat that it's vital the European Union stays together and, of course, builds its own army, which I think is very, very dangerous. Let's ask Joshua, who's a brand new caller to LBC and lives in Oxford, what he thinks of the Lavrov proposal. Good evening, Joshua.
Good evening, Nigel. It's great to speak to you. I've been a fan for a long time. I basically
it's lovely to have you on.
Yeah, thanks very much. I basically think with situations like this, you have to go back to the old Latin, cui bono, who benefits? Because it doesn't seem, the Russians don't seem to be benefiting a lot from, if they did carry out the attack, we're talking about one of the oldest and most well-established, intelligence agencies, the FSB, in the world, very successful. Why would they do it so it would be traced back to them so easily.
Well,
and also...
Joshua, one possible explanation, it's gone now, is that this attack happened shortly before the elections at which Putin got re-elected, and that the idea in Russia that people who've been traitors get attacked or bumped off could actually boost Mr. Putin's popularity. It's the only theory I've heard as to how Russia might benefit from this.
Well, I would also say that we're talking about someone that's been in this country, a spy that's been in this country for, I don't know, a few years now, at least.
Yep.
He would have been debriefed. If he had any information that would be critical, for us to know, and the Russians didn't want us to have it, he would have been bumped off long ago.
Way past that point.
He would have given them all the information, and like you said, that's the. But then, if you think, well, if the Russians don't benefit, do we benefit? Does the UK? I myself think that it's probably a rogue element in the Russian government, or the Russian government and Russian crime organizations are so interwoven now that maybe this is a case of this man has upset the wrong people, he's been dealt with, and the Russian government know who did it, but for them to admit that they've got people that can get hold of this agent and use it, where they want, it shows that they've lost control. It's the only reason. But I would say this, Nigel, that for about 10 years now, ever since the Alexander Litvinenko case, this country and Russia has the most appalling relations. Yet we, as the British people, aren't being given real reasons as to why it is. I believe there are reasons why this country and Russia has deep animosity at the moment, but I don't think the British government is being very forthcoming as to the reasons why. Maybe there's stuff going on in Syria between our special forces at the moment that we're not privy to. I don't know, but I think as a British citizen, I don't support Russia. I'm a patriot like you, British all the way, but I don't want the Britain or the West to go into any, worsening situation with Russia, Cold War or anywhere in the world. And I think that as a citizen,
no, but it's funny, isn't it?
Decide, if this government in Russia is really our true enemy, because at the moment we're not being given many.
Joshua, it's so interesting that here we've got this escalation between the UK and Russia. And here in America, OK, Trump did expel 60 diplomats, but he is still talking about having a summit with Putin. And that, to me, must make sense. Jaw is better than war is what Churchill always said. And I don't want our relations to get any worse than they are. Joshua, thank you very much indeed for calling in. Now, Margaret's very suspicious. She says when the other Russian was poisoned, by which she means Litvinenko 10 years ago, we had photos of him sitting up in his bed. But with this, there is nothing. I think it's a huge distraction. I don't trust this government. There's a bad smell about this one. So many of you don't trust this government. Frank in Whitehaven says, I've changed my mind. It's high time the Foreign Secretary comes clean. I think he knows more than he lets on. Well, Frank, of all the people, it's Boris Johnson from the start who has said it's absolutely certain that the Kremlin did this. Please, Boris, either give us some information or tell us you can't give it to us for reasons of secrecy. But just to expect people to blindly believe what they're told, I'm afraid the days when we trusted our leaders that much are long, long gone. Timothy is calling from Cambridge, another new caller to LBC. Good evening, Timothy.
Good evening.
So, what do you reckon's happening here?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I don't believe for a moment that Mrs. May's fingerprints are on this nerve gas attack. It's a very typical kind of piece of distraction propaganda put out by the Kremlin. What I do think is going on is that this is a consequence of a problem in Russia's domestic politics. And it's an aspect of this which has not been very roundly observed, but President Putin has inherited a country in trouble, and he has embarked on another term as presidency in which he has got to try and overcome crippling problems inside Russia, above all the fact that the state is running out of money. And the reason it's running out of money is because it needs oil prices to come in at something between $70 or $80 a barrel to break even. And
well, they have rallied, Timothy, quite a lot recently, haven't they?
They have rallied, but this is unlikely to remain the case as American shale comes online and Iranian oil comes online. Put another way, Russia is facing a kind of structural deficit, and it's not clear that the state can pay its way. And I think we're already seeing signs of distress in the Russian system. There are rumors of people not getting paid, oligarchs not getting their cut. And my reading of what's happened recently in Britain is that Putin is sending a warning to potentially wayward elements inside the Russian system not to misbehave. And that includes disgruntled state employees who might be thinking about...
So do you mean a sort of you can run, but you can't hide kind of message, yeah?
Well, absolutely. I think it is relevant that he committed this attack on British soil because he is sending the message that you're not safe anywhere. So, in that sense, it's very much.
But Timothy,
yes.
But Timothy, can I just fight back at you? And you've made some very good points about the Russian deficit, financial problems, oil prices. I understand all of that, and Russia, it does need raw commodity prices to be high, whether it's nickel or oil or whatever it is. But the World Cup football is potentially a big money spinner for Russia, a chance for them to showcase to the world that it's now a great, efficient place and a good place to go and visit. Why would they do something like this at this moment in time, which threatens to kibosh the whole World Cup?
Well, I think there's two factors. The first is the Russian presidential election. So Putin has to send a clear signal at the time that he comes to power that no one should attempt to double-cross him. But I think the second aspect is that he's miscalculated badly. He perceived Britain as an isolated country which would not be able to marshal international support against him. And he simply miscalculated, and he didn't realise that Britain still had international authority and the alliance was strong.
Well, she's certainly got support over this. Timothy, some really interesting points. Great phone call. Thank you very much indeed. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:45.
Coming up at 8 on LBC, Clive Bull.
The Victims Commissioner says police should stop using excuses for not attending low-level crimes. Is she right that minor crimes should be investigated?
Clive Bull on LBC.
It's in my hair, my eyebrows, it's even up my nose. They make painting look easy on the telly, but let me tell you, it's not. The wall looks like it's been finger-painted by a giant child. Who's going to rescue this? Oh, relax. It's Trust a Trader. Actual professionals who know what they're doing and don't leave the place looking like, my face. Now I can concentrate on the important stuff. Whispering peach or dirty mayonnaise. Visit trustatrader.com.
Trustatrader.com. This is your captain speaking. I'd like to welcome you on board today's flight. As we're currently behind schedule, we're going to skip all the pre-flight checks and just proceed with takeoff. I've given the tyres a kick and I think we've got enough fuel to get there, and the oil warning light hasn't come on yet, so buckle up and enjoy the flight.
You wouldn't fly without the proper checks, so why drive without them? Highways England recommends you check your tyres, fuel and oil before every long journey. For more information on vehicle safety checks, search Think.
If you own a Swiss watch and it's time to sell it, speak to watches.co.uk. The whole process runs like clockwork. Rolex, Patek Philippe, Omega and more. It only takes a couple of ticks and we pay immediately. Or if you just fancy a change, we could take yours in part exchange. From time on your hands to money in your pocket, it couldn't be easier with watches.co.uk. The pre-owned Swiss watch specialist.
Block management. It's a doddle, isn't it? I mean, once you've got budget approval, all you need to do is your service charge invoices,
health and safety regulations paperwork, do the cleaning, the gardening, general maintenance, sort out site inspections, arrange contracts, insurance, emergency representation.
Yeah, this block management? Such a doddle.
Save time and money and cut down on the stress. For complete block management solutions, just call ABC Estates. ABC will take care of all your day-to-day management, leaving you as happy as Larry.
For complete block management solutions, see abcestates.co.uk or call 0800 888 6688.
The Nigel Farage Show on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
So what am I doing here in lovely Boulder, Colorado? Well, tonight I've got a debate, a head-to-head debate with Vicente Fox, the former Mexican president, and I think just about the most outspoken critic of Donald Trump and his immigration policies in the world. Here's just a sort of little section of what Vicente Fox sounds like.
Mexico will not pay for the wall.
So he's pretty outspoken about the wall, about Trump, about immigration, and he, I think, is a sort of self-professed globalist. I, of course, believe in the nation state, and I think Brexit was the right call and Trump was the right call. It promises to be, given the colourful language that President Fox uses, a very, very lively evening here in Boulder. I shall report back tomorrow and we'll get some clips up on lbc.co.uk. Well, so far, you're all pretty sceptical about the Russian idea that it could have been the British government responsible for this poisoning. Very little support for that idea, but equally, you're pretty split as to whether the Kremlin ultimately was responsible for this poisoning or not. And you keep asking me the question, why should we believe what Theresa May says? And there's just lots of scepticism. Caroline from Hampshire says, I'd like to know how the door handle was contaminated, how the policeman was infected, why everyone, since the event, seems to be wearing huge amounts of protective clothing. So what's happened to... Who planted it? What's happened to the person that planted it? Caroline, I don't know any of those answers. Nigel, our government has probably seen the evidence for the Salisbury poisoning from our intelligence services ages ago, but they would be daft to release it to the world quite yet. John in Burnham-on-Sea, I understand that, but why not just say that to us? Say, look, we do actually have the evidence. We can't present it to you, for reasons of national security. We might believe them a little bit more if they say that, rather than Boris just saying, yes, of course it was them that did it. And, perhaps it goes back to Tony Blair. Perhaps it goes back to weapons of mass destruction. Perhaps it goes back to us joining George W. Bush in the Gulf, in the war in Iraq. We were told something that simply wasn't true, and we're now very sceptical about what we're told. Gina's very sceptical. I believe it was an amateurish, possibly no nerve agent at all. All smoke and mirrors. All sounds very suspect. Ginny says, methinks the Russians protest too much. So nobody thinks the British government did this, or nobody really. I'm going to go to the Isle of Man, to Anthony. Yes, another new caller to this show. Anthony, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I am well. I don't believe what Sergei Lavrov has said for one moment, but I'm still yet to be convinced that President Putin authorised this.
So let me go back to your previous caller who asserts that Putin needed to do this fundamentally because he's weak in his own country. I fundamentally disagree with that because he's very, very popular domestically. Boris Johnson has...
Well, Anthony, I think actually the argument was not weak politically, but potentially weak economically. That was the argument, I think.
Yeah, you can lay that argument on any number of countries.
Okay,
Boris Johnson was very, very forthright in stating that he had evidence going back years that Putin and Russia were doing this. We are signatories to an organisation of prohibition of chemical weapons. So if the British government had evidence of this, they should have followed UN protocol and reported this to the OPCW, which they allegedly haven't.
That's right.
The other thing is, as well, is the nerve agents allegedly used was primarily manufactured in Uzbekistan, not in Russia, right? Yep. It was manufactured in the 1980s. Now, since the 1980s, obviously since the fall of the USSR, the Uzbekistani government has been working directly alongside the US government in decontaminating and containing those development sites, right? So I'm not necessarily saying it's the US government or the British government, but if certain elements of those organisations wish to do something like this, the technology has been available to them since the 80s. Iran...
Okay, but politically, Anthony, politically, the risk
politically
of the Americans or British... Yeah,
you know...
Well, okay.
Saying all the interferences in the US election, interferences in Brexit, interferences in the French elections, Russia. You know, it's a narrative that's been carried on for like the last 2 years now, hasn't it?
Longer. I remember actually going way back to the European elections. My LBC debate with Nick Clegg, and you know, he basically said that Brexiteers are on Putin's side. So he's been held up as the enemy of the establishment for a very long time. And yes, it may well suit, in many ways, Theresa May and other Western leaders for this crisis to be as it is. But doesn't it really stretch the bounds of credibility to think that an official agent of the US or the UK government could have done this?
I'm not saying it's sanctioned by the US or the UK government. I'm saying it's possible that this technology, which has been around since the 1980s, and don't forget Iran in the 1990s did actually produce this nerve agent under the auspices of the OPCW, right? They said, yes, we can manufacture this, and they reported those results to the OCPW. So if Iran can do it in the 90s, any other state actor that's got access to those sites can do it ever since then.
Okay.
It makes absolutely
So my theory, Anthony, that it was a rogue Russian agent, you're saying it could be a rogue British or American agent equally?
It could be a rogue British or American or whatever else, Israeli, French, whoever organisation that does. Why use a technology which can be traced directly back to the Russians that doesn't even actually work because they're not dead? Why use it?
I know. Anthony, you've raised some very, very interesting questions. Thank you very much indeed. Why would Russia miscalculate? They're not daft. Up against NATO, football, harsher sanctions, not a chance. This was not the work of the Russian government. Absolutely nothing to gain, says Sandra. Lynn says, wouldn't the Russians have been more efficient and actually killed their targets without affecting any members of the public or the police? Lynn, you're another one that thinks that Putin is a better class of assassin and that it wouldn't have finished up this way. And Terry just says there is no real evidence, only an unprovable accusation. Well, Terry, you could say that on both sides. David is calling from Storrington. Good evening, David.
Oh, hello, Nigel. Yes. My point I'd like to make is that it could be neither of these two perpetrators, Russia or Britain necessarily, although, and I think it actually preposterous that Mrs. May ordered this, but she did take enormous advantage from it and took advantage of it to the point that it changed the image of her actual government. But if you look at this, who else has a motive that would be credible? And to me, this could well be linked to Syria. We know from your last caller that Iran could make this stuff. We also know that the actual ingredients for this actually passed through Turkey to the rebels, as was revealed by a Kurdish MP in the Turkish parliament. And what better than to set the West against Russia in a place like Syria? It would be an absolute brilliant coup to do something like that. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but a bit more has to be investigated about this as to who possibly could have done it.
And when our Prime Minister, the modern-day Boadicea, Mrs. Thatcher reincarnate, this strong leader, and our Foreign Secretary, when they tell you that it absolutely was the Kremlin that did it, are you one of the many millions now who's a bit suspicious about what government leaders say?
Utterly. I don't believe a word any of them say.
I keep hearing this. So now they've certainly profited from it. You've made that point, but it would be ludicrous to suggest that any British agent had done this, wouldn't it?
I agree. I honestly do agree with that. I think that's completely and utterly impossible. But the manner of this, the way this was done, the botched actual event itself, the lack of motive for Russia, and the preposterous nature that the British did it, makes me think a third party did it.
And we're looking at Syria. Complex, David, thank you. Well, do you know, there are so many very, very good calls and different arguments that have been made. Nobody yet knows the truth of this, but it's certainly, I refuse to believe the British government did this. I think the Russians are looking for their own big distraction. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening at 7. I'll report back on my debate with Vincenti Fox. At 10 tonight, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you. Coming up at 9, the Business Hour, and with us this week, Emma Jones, small business expert, and special guest Mark Wright, winner of The Apprentice, and business partner to Lord Sugar. He'll be talking about digital marketing. Also later, statins are not being prescribed to hundreds of thousands of patients at high risk of heart disease. Why is this happening? We'll find out later. And first, the Victims Commissioner says police should stop using a lack of resources as an excuse for not attending low-level crimes. Is she right that minor crimes should always be investigated? 0345 6060 973.